Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys about the fact that there are no magical exercises or any muscle in your body. And let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing. Work on skilling my crafting a little bit. Let's talk about what I mean here, because this is one of the things that people oftentimes use for marketing or to pretend like they know some magic secret for making a muscle grow or whatever. And here's the reality. Your muscles only know tension, work, recovery, nutrition, stuff like that. That's all they know, okay? Your muscles know what muscle fibers got stimulated and which ones didn't. They don't really ultimately care. As far as the muscle fibers themselves growing or hypertrophying or getting thicker, they don't care what exercises you use to get there. All they care about is the work that was used. All right? A muscle fiber is going to grow or it isn't. It's going to grow based upon if it was recruited or not. And recruited enough to fatigue it. Okay, because sometimes you've got to recruit it multiple times, the same muscle fiber, to get it to really grow effectively. All right, so what do I mean there? Well, people will say, well, shouldn't a muscle grow faster if it's worked really, really effectively? Like if you pick a really good exercise that gets all the muscle fibers and everything, shouldn't it grow faster? Yeah, with less work. That's it. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say you take an exercise that isn't that great of an exercise for a muscle, but still works it decently. All right, can you stimulate maximum growth with that? Yeah, of course you can. You have to do a lot more work to do it. You want a perfect example? How about a hammer curl or a lat pull down, right? Lat pull down for your bicep. Now, the bicep is most efficient and recruits the most muscle fibers when your palm is out doing stuff. So that's why chin-ups, right? You do chin-ups, you do curls like this. Hammer curls take some of the load off the bicep. They put it on the brachialis and some of it on the radiobrachialis, right? Takes a little bit of load off the bicep, okay? Brings these other muscles in. Lat pull down does the same thing. Now, interestingly enough, we're really only concerned with people who are more advanced. We know from novice lifters that lat pull downs in studies done cause more bicep growth than curls do. People go, what? I can't believe you said that. Yeah, there's multiple studies showing that. I've linked them in the past. We know that. In noobs, heavy compounds will put more size on you. Even if it's not an ideal compound, it seems to put more size even on the smaller muscles. But we're talking about total growth. You know, how much can you make it grow once you've been lifting a little while? With a noob, big heavy compounds will make maximum growth on everything. You pick 4, 5, 6 basic compound movements, do good volume with them, every muscle in your body's going to grow. As you get more advanced, that's not necessarily the case. But you take a lat pull down or a hammer curl, they work the bicep, but they probably recruit maybe 20% less muscle fibers, just a ballpark estimate, than a curl does or a chin-up does that works it in the correct plane of motion, right? What does that mean? It means you probably need to do about 20% more work. Meaning if you did the same sets and reps, you would probably get more growth out of the exercise that puts the direct stress on the bicep better. But if you did a little more work with the other one, you would get just as much growth. All right? People will say, oh my God, that can't be true. Yeah, it is true. I mean, you want proof. You want proof. Look how many guys out there have big biceps who train their biceps terribly. Train their biceps terribly. What do I mean? How about dudes who use an easy curl bar? Proven anatomical fact. The easy curl bar, that angle, takes stress off the bicep. You work the bicep less if you use the same amount of weight for the same amount of reps with an easy curl bar. How many guys don't even do them right? How many guys you see who do easy curl bars, they don't even come all the way down and then they come up like this and their shoulders are doing a ton of the work, right? They do this really crappy cheek curling, right? How many of them, though, do you see pretty big guys with pretty good sized biceps who do that? A lot of them. How did they get big biceps doing a terrible exercise? They did more work. These guys probably do 20 sets of curls a week. The ones with the really big biceps who do the piss poor curls that don't really work the biceps that well, they're working all sorts of other muscles in their body. Biceps are probably doing less than half the work with the way that they're curling. But they get big biceps because they do a lot of them. So they're taking an exercise that you say, well, you know, the biceps doing less work, but it's doing work. If you make it do enough work, it will grow. All right, it'll grow. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. That's what it comes down to. If you tried an exercise and you saw noticeable growth and you weren't a noob anymore, because noobs see noticeable growth with anything, you know what that tells me? It doesn't tell me that you found a magical exercise. It means that you found an exercise that actually works the muscle and you just weren't working the muscle enough. Now, when I say not working it enough, does that mean maybe your exercises were bad? No. Maybe you just weren't doing enough total workload on the exercises you were doing. All right? It doesn't matter whether it's your traps, your side delts, whatever it happens to be. If you're doing a wide variety of big compound movements, those muscles are getting some work. All right? If you're doing overhead pressing, if you're doing rowing, side delts are getting worked. The traps are getting worked on both those exercises. Are they ideal exercises? No. But if those muscles, say your side delts or your traps, aren't growing noticeably from those, you're probably doing just enough total volume with those exercises to get the muscles you're focusing on the most to maybe grow a little bit. Maybe that's what you're getting. Maybe that's what's going on. So they're getting some stimulation, and then you add a new exercise in and those muscles really come up. All that means is you just weren't doing enough volume on these exercises that were only decently working these muscles. Some cases the overhead press can actually build pretty big side delts, especially if you do enough volume, or if you use dumbbells or behind the neck press. It's usually pretty significant. But the thing is, if you're not doing very much volume, and these are muscles that aren't necessarily the best primary movers, and you're doing minimal volume, minimal workload, you might not see maximum growth in those muscles. You're probably seeing some growth, but you're not seeing maximum growth. You might only be seeing 60 or 70% of the growth that is near maximum for them. And so then when you find an exercise that actually works them a little harder, all of a sudden they start growing. You start getting 90% or 100% of the possible growth you could have gotten. And then, you're like, oh my gosh, I found this magic exercise, whether it's, adding in a behind the neck press or a side lateral or a barbell shrug. No, you didn't find a magic exercise. You just found an exercise that works it a little better. And you added in an added volume to it. Because ultimately, muscles for maximum growth need a certain amount of volume. And sometimes with a compound movement, if you're not doing very much volume of some of your different compound movements, some of the muscles may not be getting ideal amounts of stimulation. So you come in and you add another exercise, and then all of a sudden these muscles start growing more rapidly. Well, what do I mean by that? Let's say you added a behind the neck press. Let's say you've only been doing 5 sets of overhead press, 5 sets of rows, 5 sets of chin-ups every week. That's a pretty good amount of volume. But then you add 5 sets of behind the neck press, and all of a sudden your side delts and your traps start growing more. It doesn't mean necessarily a magic exercise. It just means that you have an exercise that works those muscles maybe slightly more than some of the others you were doing, but you added volume and workload. Okay? You added volume and workload. Same thing, you'll see guys who come in and let's say they've been doing the really crappy cheat curls with an easy curl bar. And maybe they've been doing barbell rows and that's all they do for their biceps. Okay? Then they come in and they add in an incline curl, which puts a direct stretch reflex on the bicep. Then their biceps all of a sudden start growing. They might have had lagging biceps up until that point. Well, they got more workload, and those exercises are still working the biceps. It's just that maybe the way that you're performing them, you're not doing enough workload because they're not ideal exercises for it. And then you added in a good exercise for it to add additional volume, additional muscle fiber recruitment. Then it starts growing noticeably. But you know what? Had you probably just done more sets of the exercises that aren't necessarily the most ideal stimulators, you probably could have stimulated the same amount of extra growth that you saw. So that's ultimately what it comes down to. It's not that there are magic exercises. There are just exercises out there that are good stimulators. And if every muscle in your body gets at least one exercise that's a good stimulator, along with some additional secondary workload through some of your different compounds, you're going to see really, really solid, noticeable muscle growth in that muscle. But you know what? That's the whole point, is that the reason we select good exercises for things is because you're trying to cut down your gym time. That's the only reason. If a person comes in and they do huge amounts of sets and really high volume training, they don't have to pick good exercises for anything really, because the secondary carryover from all the different exercises they're doing is probably going to stimulate everything enough anyway. So they could just start picking random exercises and throwing them in, and at a certain point everything is going to be stimulated about as much as it can handle, even with poor exercise selection, just because of the volume they're doing. The downside, they're going to have more soreness, more risk of overuse injuries, more time spent in the gym, more problems with recovery, but everything is going to be maximally stimulated. The whole point of picking better exercises isn't because they stimulate more growth, because in the grand scheme of things, even a mediocre exercise for a muscle that just sits an okay stimulator can stimulate maximum growth if you do enough work. The whole point of picking the better exercises is just to get out of the gym faster, to do less work, less total sets. That's the point. That's the whole point. Any exercise that works a muscle to some extent can stimulate maximum growth. It just requires more total sets, more total reps, more total work to do so. So this idea that there are, magical exercises, that if you just do certain exercises, you're automatically going to get more growth in different muscles, that's not the case. And if you have a lagging muscle, it may not even entirely be your exercise selection is to blame. It could just be that you're just simply not doing enough workload, or you're not focusing on progressing enough on the exercises that are working that muscle. In other words, you're not increasing your overload, your workload enough over time to get the job done. So don't get too caught up in this idea that they're magical exercises. Ultimately, all that really matters for making a muscle grow is how much work are you actually subjecting it to. That's it. And a good stimulator for every muscle, there's probably 5 or 6 really, really good stimulators out there. To think that any of them are better than another isn't necessarily true, because a good stimulator of a muscle can completely develop it if you just do enough sets with it pretty easily. So it's not like, oh, this exercise is better than this one. That really becomes an arbitrary thing at a certain point. That's the sort of stuff people like to fixate on and focus on, but it's not really true. There are probably 5 different exercises for any given muscle that are all the best, but they're only the best in the context of they work the muscle thoroughly enough that you don't have to do very many sets or reps in order to stimulate maximum growth in that muscle. And that's all it is. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.